Hello again. In this video for DMA 20 section 9 we're going to investigate multiplying decimals. In this video we're going to learn first the rules for multiplying decimals and then learn how to multiply decimals quickly when we're multiplying by powers of 10. Then we'll look at some examples with exponents, orders of operations, estimating with multiplication, and lastly an application problem. Next time, we'll look at section 2.10, dividing decimals. Here are the rules for multiplying decimals. First, we need to line the numbers up at the rightmost place. So, unlike addition and subtraction, with multiplication we line things up at the right, not at the decimal. Then we'll multiply the decimals as if they were whole numbers. In step 3, we find the total number of decimal places in both of the factors. So we'll count how many places there were in both the numbers that we were multiplying. And then in step 4, starting from the right and moving to the left, we need to move in the number of places that we found in step 3 and place the decimal in the answer. Now let's look at some examples for multiplication. The first example is 1 3/10 multiplied by 5 thousandths. Now, we're going to line these numbers up at the rightmost place. So we're going to align the 3 with the 5, disregarding the decimals. Always put the number with the most non-zero digits on top. So for this example, it's going to be 1.3. It has 2 non-zero digits, while this number only has 1. So this is the number that we're going to put on the top, and this number will go underneath. So we have 1.3 times 5 thousandths. And these are the numbers that we're going to multiply. 5 times 3 is 15. That's 5 group the 1. And then 5 times 1 is 5, plus 1 is 6. Alright, so we don't need to multiply by all these rows of zeros because they're just going to give us more zeros, and we'll add together. We'll still get 65 as our main answer. So now it's time to place our decimal. If we look at the factors, we have 1 decimal place here, and then 1, 2, 3 down here. So altogether that's 1, 2, 3, 4 decimal places that we have in our factors. We need to move in that many places on the bottom. So starting at the right, we'll move in 1, 2, 3, 4 places, and that's where our decimal will go. Now in these empty places, we'll put in zeros, and it's nice to put a 0 before the decimal too. So our final answer for this problem is 65 10,000ths. In our next example, we have 243 times 5.1, negative 243 times 5.1. We have a negative times a positive, so you have to remember that when their signs are different, our answer is going to be negative. So we should get a negative answer for this problem. We'll start with the 243 on top, because it has the most non-zero digits, times 5.1, lining them up at the right. Then I'll start multiplying by the 1 first. And next I need to multiply by the 5. I'll put in my 0 placeholder because I'm multiplying by a new line. 5 times 3 is 15. 5 carry the 1. 5 times 4 is 20, plus 1 is 21. And then 5 times 2 is 10, plus 2 is 12. Now I'll add these up. 3, 9, 3, 2, 1. And now I need to count my decimal places. There was only one decimal place in our factors, so that means I need to only move in one decimal place here, starting from the right. So it's going to be between the 9 and the 3. That's my decimal. And remember that our answer was negative because we had a positive times a negative. So my final answer was negative 1,239 3/10. Now we'll learn how to quickly multiply by powers of 10. To multiply by powers of 10 greater than 1, like 10, 100, 1,000, 10,000, 100,000, etc., basically a 1 with a whole bunch of zeros afterwards, move the decimal point to the right the same number of places as there are zeros in the power of 10. So let's look at some examples. In this first example, I have 2.8 times 10. 10 is my power of 10. It has 1 0. So that means I'm going to move the decimal over here one place to the right. It gets moved one place to the right and is going to be between the 8 and the 1. So the answer to this multiplication problem is going to be 28.1. Very quickly able to do that. In the next example, we have 76 thousandths times 10,000. Here I have 1, 2, 3, 4 decimal places, or 4 zeros in my power of 10. So I need to move my decimal 1, 2, 3, 4 places to the right. Now in that empty place, I have to put in a 0. Okay, so my final answer for this problem is going to be 760. Again, to reiterate, I had 0.076. I moved over 1, 2, 3, 4 places, and then I filled in the empty place with a 0. Now we'll look at how to multiply by powers of 10 that are smaller than 1. These are numbers like 0.1, 0.01, 0.001, etc. I'm going to have a decimal, a lot of zeros, and then end with a 1. So to multiply decimal by these numbers, we move the decimal point to the left this time, the same number of decimal places there are in the power of 10. So we don't count the zeros here, we count the number of decimal places we have. So in our first example, our power of 10 has 1, 2 decimal places. 1, 2. That means I have to move my decimal here 2 places to the left this time. 1, 2. So my answer becomes 1.458. In this next example, I have 1, 2, 3, 4 decimal places. So my decimal here moves 4 places to the left. Let me rewrite that number. I had 976. My decimal starts here, and I move 1, 2, 3, 4 places to the left. So I get 0.000. I put zeros in where those placeholders are, 976. Again, this multiplication works very quickly. It's just moving the decimal left to right the correct number of spaces. Now on to some examples with exponents. Remember, the number inside here is what we call our base, and that's the number that we're multiplying multiple times. This number, the exponent, tells us how many times we multiply the base by itself. So I'll write out the expansion for this first example first. 2.4 to the second power is going to be 2.4 twice. So 2.4 times 2.4. Okay. Now we'll have to multiply those. This is 2.4 times 2.4. And I'll start multiplying by the 4. 4 times 4 is 16. 4 times 2 is 8, plus 1 is 9. Put in my 0 placeholder as I move to the next line and start multiplying by 2. 2 times 4 is 8, and 2 times 2 is 4. I'll add these together. I get 6, 7, 5. And now I have to place my decimal. I have 1, 2 decimals in my factors. That means I move in my decimal 2 places, and I get 5.76. Now, for our second example, I have negative 0.05 to the third power. So let's write out this expansion first. Remember, when the negative's inside the parentheses there, I have to keep it each time in my expansion. So here I have it twice, or 3 times. I'm going to start with my first 2 terms. This is a negative times a negative, so my answer here is going to be positive. So I'll go ahead and put that in there to remind myself. And when I do the 0.05 times 0.05, I'll multiply by 5 and get 25. And then I don't have to do any of that zero multiplication. I have, let's see here, 1, 2, 3, 4 decimals in my factors, so I have to move in 1, 2, 3, 4 spaces here. So I put in 2 placeholder zeros. So with my leading zero, now I have a positive 0.0025, and I have to bring down this term that I haven't used, another negative 0.05. Now I have a positive times a negative. This is going to give me a negative answer, so I'm going to go ahead and put that sign in now so I don't forget. 0.0025 times 0.05. I'll do the multiplication for that now. 5 times 5 is 25. 5 times 5 is 10, plus 2 is 12. And I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 decimal places in my factors. So I need to move my decimal in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 places and put in 3 zeros for those empty placeholders. So my final answer is 0.000125. So you can see that sometimes when we multiply by decimals that are smaller than 1 with exponents, we're going to get a lot of those leading zeros. And don't forget your sign rules. Next, we'll look at some decimal examples with order of operations. Just to remind ourselves of the order of operations, it's parentheses, exponents, multiplying and dividing, and then adding and subtracting. Always from left to right with those. So the first thing that I have here is a set of parentheses. Really, it's an absolute value, okay? But we consider those parentheses in order of operations nonetheless. So I have a negative 3.6 plus 1.9 as my first operation. These signs are different. I have a negative and a positive, so I must subtract those two. I have 3.6 minus 1.9. I'll do that subtraction. I must borrow, so I get 16 minus 9 is 7. I line those up at the decimal. I bring the decimal straight down, and then 2 minus 1 is 1. And I'm going to keep the sign of the larger number. So I get negative 1.7. So when I rewrite this, I get negative 0.6 squared plus 5 times the absolute value of the negative 1.7. I'm going to finish off that absolute value next. Remember, the absolute value is the distance this 1.7 is from 0. So that's going to be a positive 1.7. Oh, excuse me, 7. And that was times the 5. Remember, there's implied multiplication here. So that was times this 5, and I'm going to bring down everything I haven't used. The next thing that I have after parentheses, that's done, is going to be exponents. So I have the 0.6 squared. Now the negative is on the outside, so I don't repeat it, so it's a positive 0.6 times another positive 0.6. I multiply those together, I get 32. I have to move in my decimal 1, 2 spaces, 1, 2. I have 0.32. So bring down the negative because I haven't used that yet. And that goes in front of the 0.32, okay, from my exponent. And then carry down everything that I haven't used yet. So exponents are done. The next thing that I have to do is multiplication. And I've got some multiplication right here. 5 times 1.7. So I'm going to put the 1.7 on the top because it's the most non-zero digits, times 5. 5 times 7 is 35. 5 times 1 is 5, plus 3 is 8. Now I have to move in one decimal place, and I get 8.5. So now I have negative 0.32 plus 8.5. Now I have different signs. I have a positive and a negative. So I need to subtract the two. The 8.5 is the bigger number, so that's the number that's going to go on top. 8.5 minus the 0.32, lining those up at the decimal. Add a 0 here to make them the same length, and it's time to subtract. I can't do 0 minus 2, so I have to borrow. This becomes a 4, and this is now a 10. 10 minus 2 is 8. 4 minus 3 is 1. And 8 minus nothing is 8, bringing that decimal straight down. So my answer is 8.18. I keep the sign of the larger number here, which was the 8.5, so my final answer will be positive. I get a positive 8.18. Now for some estimating problems. In this first example, they want us to estimate by rounding to the nearest tenth. So that's one place past the decimal. So it's here and here. 13.91. I look to the right of the 9 and I find a 1. The 1's is less than 5, so it's going to make that 9 stay the same. I have 13.9. And then with my 5.27, I look to the right of my 2. The 7 is greater than 5, so it's going to make that 2 go up to 5.3. And I'm aligning these at the right. They just so happen to line up at the decimal this time. And now I'll multiply. 3 times 9 is 27. 3 times 3 is 9, plus 2 is 11. And then 3 times 1 is 3, plus 1 is 4. Now I'll start, let me erase those little carryovers. I'll start multiplying by the 5. I put in my 0 placeholder. 5 times 9 is 45. 5 carry the 4. 5 times 3 is 15, plus 4 is 19. And then 5 times 1 is 5, plus 1 is 6. Time to add these together. 7, 6, 13, and 7. And so I have to move in 1, 2 decimal places. So I move in 1, 2, and I get 73.67. So that's how I got my answer by rounding to the nearest tenth. Next, I'm going to estimate the second problem by front and rounding. So I'm rounding to the leftmost place. In this number 27, it's the tens, and 6.14, it's the ones place. So for 27, I look to the right. The 7's going to make the 2 go up. I'll round that to 30. For my decimal number, 6 and 41/100ths, I look to the right to the 4. That's not going to make the 6 go up. It stays the same, so it just stays as 6, and I drop off everything after the decimal. And now I'll multiply these two numbers. 6 times 0 is 6, or 0, excuse me. And 6 times 3 is 18. So my estimation here with front and rounding was 180. Finally, an application problem. If you're paid every other week, your monthly gross income is your gross income for one paycheck times 2.17, because there's just a little bit more than 4 weeks in a month. Find the monthly gross income of a supermarket clerk who earns $1,095.70 every 2 weeks. And then we're going to round that to the nearest cent. The nearest cent means the hundredths place, or 2 places past the decimal. So I'll put my longer number on the top. And then 2.17 underneath it. I am rounding or aligning these at the right. The decimals just so happen to line up this time. That will not always be the case. And now we'll multiply. We'll start with a 7. 7 times 0 is 7. 7 times 7 is 49. 7 times 5 is 35, plus 4 is 39. 7 times 6 is, 63, plus 3 is 66. 7 times 0 is 0, plus 6 is 6. And then 7 times 1 is 7. I'll put a 0 placeholder in. I like to erase my carries so I don't have to look at them or get confused by them by the second time. And now I'll multiply by 1. That's 0, 7, 5, 9, 0, 1. And then I'll start multiplying by the 2. Before I can do that, I have to put in not 1, but 2 placeholders, an extra placeholder for every line that I move down. 2 times 0 is 0. 2 times 7 is 14. 2 times 5 is 10, plus 1 is 11. 2 times 9 is 18, plus 1 is 19. 2 times 0 is 0, plus 1 is 1. And then 2 times 1 is 2. I've multiplied by everything, so it's time to add things up. And it's time to place my decimal. I have to move in 1, 2, 3, 4 places here. 1, 2, 3, 4. My decimal is going to go right here. And now I need to round to the nearest cents, or the hundredths place. That's 2 places past the decimal. So that's where the second 6 is. This 9 is going to make that 6 go up to a 7. So my final answer here is going to be $2,377.67 when I round that last digit up. So that's our answer for this problem. And let's look at this. It makes sense. If we're making just a little over $1,000 every 2 weeks, and we're multiplying by a number that's just a little bit over 2, we should get something that's around $2,000. So if we made a multiplication error, or if we made a decimal error and got something like 23,000 or 237, we would have noticed that we made that mistake, because if you do some front-end estimation in your head, I would round 2.17 to 2. And I'd round this to 2,000. So by quickly using that front end estimation that we practice, we know that our answer should be just around 2,000, which indeed it is. So that's everything for this section 2.9. We learned how to multiply decimals by lining them up at the right and then moving in our decimal correctly. We learned how to quickly multiply by powers of 10, both greater than or less than 1. We reviewed some exponent rules and the order of operations with decimals. Then we did some practice with estimating and multiplication, and we were able to put that into practice with an application problem. In our next video, we'll cover section 2.10, dividing decimals.